Well, hi, Jesus. Thank you so much for joining me. Could you introduce yourself real quick, your name and a little bit about where you're from?
Of course. Thank you for having me. My name is Jesús Serrano-Cendejas. I'm 25 years old and I am from Mexico City. I um, I was born and raised in Mexico City, but then I had the privilege to go to boarding school for high school in Canada. My high school is called Ridley College, and it was in Ontario, St. Catharines, Ontario, really close to the Canadian Henley course. Actually, that's where I started rowing. And then after that, I went to college in Princeton, where I studied mechanical and aerospace engineering. And after that, I moved here to the Bay Area, where I have been living and working since.
That's so cool. How did you get into rowing? I mean, obviously, if you're going to boarding school in St. Catharines, I've been there. There's statues everywhere. It's probably
It's
like
everywhere.
it just
Well, it's funny.
happens, maybe.
I didn't know anything about rowing before going there. I grew up swimming. That's sort of the sport that my brothers and I did growing up. I was terrible at soccer. Soccer is the biggest sport at home, and everybody plays soccer, but I was always so bad. And so I went into swimming instead, and I loved it. But when I went to my new high school, I decided that I was gonna take the opportunity to maybe try a new sport, something different. And you're right, like rowing was sort of everywhere. And my high school had a team, so I figured, why not? Let me go check this out. And from day one of being on the water, I sort of fell in love with the sport, and I have been doing it ever since.
hmm So, did you row all 4 years in high school then?
Yeah, I did. I tried to like juggle both rowing and swimming. Uh I would row in the fall like um term, and then I would swim in the winter, and then I would row again in the spring. And yeah, it was the best. I loved it.
hmm So, did you then use rowing to get into college, or did you just sort of go to college and you also rowed? Like,
Yeah.
how did all that work?
Yeah, I mean, some of my teammates in school did use rowing to get into their colleges later, but not for me. I got in independently, and only once I was in, I started to look at continuing to row. I didn't even know if it would be possible because I wasn't recruited or anything. I was hoping that I would be able to just walk on and continue to do it. So I I didn't even know about the recruiting process and how all of that worked. And once I got in, I just thought I would look up who the coach was and shoot him an email, let him know that I had gone in and I had been rowing throughout my high school career. And I was just wondering if I could continue to do it at Princeton. And yeah, the team at Princeton has a huge walk-on program. We took walk-ons every year. There's like a big cohort every year, and I guess people that have never done it come in and try it, or people that have done it but didn't necessarily get recruited sort of come in with that group as well. And yeah, I mean, if you start to like it and then survive the practices and survive the winter training, you're part of the team.
Uh-huh. So did you primarily do sweep or sculling in your juniors program, or did you do both? Did you sort of learn everything?
I started with sweep. So when I started in my grade 9 year, the little group of us, we were enough to have an 8. So I started off rowing in the 8. I was literally always bow seat. And then my second year, I was voted in a 4. But then my junior and senior year of high school, I rowed the double and the single. So that's where I sort of learned how to scull.
hmm
Um, but then going to college, it was all 8s, strictly 8s, no sculling ever. And I guess that's just for the purpose of including more people. You can have more people on the water if everybody is in the biggest boat, I guess.
hmm
So yeah, the 4 years at Princeton, it was all sweep.
You're such a good sculler that I just, I don't know, I just assumed that you had this like long history of sculling.
I was fortunate enough to be coached by Jack Nicholson, who um, was this legend of Canadian rowing. He had so many years of experience and was so incredibly meticulous about the technique. He would do every practice, and he'd bring his iPad and take a little clip of us rowing every day, and then slow it down and dissect every single motion and rip you apart and try to put you back together rowing correctly. So I was fortunate enough to have him as a coach, and really focus on my technique. He always said that the most important thing was to learn how to actually move the boat, and then I could focus on applying more power. So when I learned how to scull, the focus was always on that first.
Hmm. So what do you, if you were to make some recommendations or just tell some stories to the kids who might be watching this about what you learned as a junior that, you either still bring to your rowing today or that hugely helped you when you transitioned to college, um, what stands out to you from maybe those first 4 years when you were rowing?
Honestly, I part of what made me fall in love with it was feeling like when I was swimming, even if you're part of a team or you're swimming in a relay, it's not an individual race, but your portion of it is still always very individual. Once you're in the pool, you can't really hear anything else. It's just you. And when I started rowing, it was like if you might be really good individually, but if you don't learn to work with other people, sort of in harmony with other people, your boat's never going to go anywhere, and it's never going to feel good. And sort of that experience of being part of something bigger was really attractive to me. I think it helped me learn about myself, learn how to work with other people, learn how to communicate better. And I found it really rewarding. On top of that, I also fell in love with the fact that I got to exercise and get better and really push myself, but also in like beautiful places.
Yeah.
You're doing a really hard piece, but you take a second to look around you, and it's amazing. So that was kind of intoxicating as well, and it always made me want to go back. And then finally, I think when you don't know about rowing, you might look at it and you're repeating the same motion, the same stroke over and over and over again. But as soon as you start to learn more about it, there are so many components of the stroke and so many ways that you can improve or, find that little extra bit of speed. So it's like a never-ending pursuit of excellence that also I guess really resonated with me and my personality, and kept me wanting to go back. I think that those were the things that really hooked me in my experience.
Hmm. Great. Well, and I know that you've been starting to do a little bit of coaching with masters. So now you have both the launch point of view and your own point
Yeah.
of view from having rowed for so long. And one of the reasons I asked you to talk with me today is because you're not really the typical rower. You're not over 6 feet. You're not
Yeah.
super big. I know that you have pretty much always been a lightweight. So I imagine that there have been different technical focuses for you than there might be for someone who can just drop that erg
For
score
sure.
insanely. So what have you worked on, and as specific as you can get, like what little techniques, either mentally or physically or about the stroke itself, have you been able to kind of work to your advantage?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you can really see from me right now talking, but I'm 5'6" and I have never been heavier than 140 pounds, which, it doesn't really matter what I do, what I eat. I guess that would be a blessing for a lot of people, but I have just never been able to get any bigger than that. And in rowing, for the most part, more weight, more mass really favors you, especially on the erg during erg testing. The heavier you are, you can just stand on it and the fan will go. So I knew that the erg was never going to be my strong suit. That and this is not to say that lighter people or smaller people cannot be really good at the erg, because on my Princeton team, we had a couple of guys that were also on the lighter side, on the shorter side, and were incredible athletes, and were faster on the erg than many people that were bigger than them. But that was just never the case for me. The erg and I were never really good friends. So I knew that for me to be competitive, I was going to have to row better, row as efficiently as I possibly could, because my power output was already limited, or at least that's what I would tell myself. So I did a lot of just watching rowing videos, watching like Olympic races or World Cup races, and I would just look at how people were moving, and then I would try to picture myself when I was in the boat, picture myself looking the same. And also, like I said, my coach Jack was, when I was in high school, was so focused on technique that I became convinced that that was going to be my strength, what I was going to be able to bring to the team, focusing on if I know that I'm this tall and I'm limited in that way, then I'm going to make sure that I'm rowing as long as possible. I'm not going to miss any water, because then that's working against me exponentially, I felt. I'm going to make sure that I stretch every day, because the more flexible that I am, the more I can compress, or the taller I can sit and still be in a strong position and maximize everything that I have. And, I think everybody should do this, not just people that are on the smaller side. Maximize what you can do with what you have. So those were things that I started to focus on when I realized that I wanted to continue rowing in college. And after college, those were what I saw as my strengths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it must be interesting for you. It sounds like you've been bow seat a lot when you were in high school and college, but then on the master's program, I know you've been at stroke seat a fair amount.
Yeah, I actually, I did land myself in stroke seat, both in some of my high school crews and in my last 2 years of college. I think because of sort of, I'm guessing because of sort of the same reasons that I'm talking about. I knew that the value that I could provide to my boat was going to be a consistent technique, a predictable stroke that other people might have an easier time following. I maybe was not going to be a 6 seed or anything like that, but I could still get pretty aggressive and try to say like a good race pace. And yeah, I think I was a predictable rower that people had an easier time following. And for my size, I did row longer than you would expect. So it ended up working. My last 2 years, I did stroke the boats that I was in. So I had to, obviously, I always knew that the people sitting behind me were going to be taller. So I every single stroke, I always thought, like, stay long, be long. So I guess that's sort of how I worked around that.
Mm-hmm. And every stroke seat at some point feels like they're being rushed by pretty much everybody behind them.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
At least, when everyone is taller, it's like they have so much more time to get there. It's like, slow it down, people.
Yeah.
So the other major reason that I wanted to invite you here is because not only are you not physically the same size and weight as a lot of the sort of stereotypical rowers, but you're not just your basic white bread rower from this sort of long history. That rowing has this reputation of being very upper class and white. And I think it's really important that people think about diversity and inclusion and how to make sure that people from different backgrounds are getting invited into the sport, because it'll just make every crew faster and every crew better. And you have a different background from many people. I just wondered if you had any input to share on your experiences in sort of the type of sport that we're used to seeing on television or movies, and how white it can sometimes be referred
Yeah,
to. Or
I think it's really important that we talk about this, because I'm sure most people that might watch this have seen or at least heard of the A Most Beautiful Thing documentary that talks about how the experience of these Black students in high school was totally changed by their involvement in rowing. And initially it felt like a challenge because no other program had ever put a Black crew together. So um, I I have noticed for the most part that rowing is a predominantly white sport, but I don't think it has to be that way. And I think um, obviously like it's a sport that requires a certain amount of money because the equipment is expensive. But I think there's so much strength in diversity, and the more um, kind of different people that can get involved, we're only going to keep finding more speed, and continue to learn more about each other and celebrate those differences as a strength rather than as something to, I guess, avoid,
mhm.
you
Have
know?
you, like, I don't want to put you on the spot necessarily, but have you ever felt excluded? Have you ever felt like the sport was weird, or anything weird happened at a regatta that you wanted to educate people about?
Thankfully, no. I have never had an experience like that. Uh, but I'm sure that other people might have a different story or a different answer to that question. I think, I mean, for the most part, a lot of the people that are involved in rowing have similar personalities, similar things that drive them or attract them to the sport. Because it's certainly not a sport that you do if you're not 100% in love with it. So, in that way, I don't think I didn't feel very different from other people. Maybe I grew up somewhere else or I spoke a different language, but um, I did feel close to my teammates, and I felt like we had a lot of things in common too. So I think
Hmm.
in that way, rowing or any sport for that matter has the power to bring people together despite other differences.
Hmm. Well, great.
Yeah.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation. Is there anything else that you might want to share with the juniors who, I mean, as you know, it's a tough time right now. Most of them started out in sweet boats, and then we've been doing nothing but sculling, as you know, since last spring. We're hoping to get back in team boats a little bit more. People are applying for college, all of the things that you have gone through at some point, they're kind of going through right now. And I know that you're on the master's team with me, and you're also sculling every morning because we can't be in team boats. Are there any words of encouragement, or anything else that you'd like to share?
I think something that comes to mind just along to answer that question was that rowing can be an incredibly competitive sport. And I think that it's really easy to get lost in the uh, pursuit for winning, and then fall into the trap of when we don't win, we failed. But I think it has so much to offer just in the process of getting there. One of my high school coaches had one of his favorite phrases that he taught us was that the win is within. Um, there is so much to celebrate just from going through this process individually, but also as a team. And there are so many lessons to get from just showing up every day and working to be better than you were when you started the practice. I think we can really learn a lot about ourselves and about each other in that way. So, um, you know, now that I haven't been away from, my high school rowing and my college rowing for that long, but I remember a lot less about the races themselves. I remember a lot more about the practices and being a community with my team and learning about my teammates and myself. So I think those are the real important lessons that you take out of being a part of something like this. So I would just, I guess, say to not lose sight of that, especially, when times are so uncertain and we have time to focus on maybe more important things. Just like, I guess, think about that.
Great. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Jesus. And hopefully we will see you out on the water soon. And
Yeah,
we'll all see each other crossing paths around Bayak and West Point in the
for
channel
sure.
with our bound stern lights on in the dark.
Yes, thank you for having me. This
All
was really
right.
great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.